I am currently 21 years old, and up until recently, I had not experienced anything that I would call supernatural. I'm still not sure what to think of these events, as they really freaked me out. I don't know if something brought it on, but I was out with my friends when I suddenly started thinking about the past, particularly about my childhood friend, Brendan. We went to elementary and middle school together, and when I was remembering this, I just assumed that he went to a different high school than me, and because of that, we drifted apart. So I decided that I was going to track him down and try and reconnect, but I couldn't find any of his social media or information about him online, and then I sort of forgot about it for a while. Then a month ago, I was out with another one of my friends called Amy, who I'd known since elementary school as well, and I asked her if she's been in contact with Brendan or if she knows how to get a hold of him. She seems to hesitate when I mentioned his last name. She remembered, she says. She told me she hasn't spoken to him in at least 8 years, but remembered his parents' address. So I drove over there, seeing as they're not actually that far. Then his parents open the door and I recognize him. They say hi to me and invite me inside, and I introduce myself and they remark on how much I've grown, and then they say they don't have a son. I immediately assumed that maybe he had gotten into drugs or something and they disowned him, but no, they insisted that they'd never had a son, and just 2 daughters who I vaguely recognize and remember. But there's no doubt this is his family. I ended up just outright accusing them of lying, and they got really defensive, so I apologized and went home. I don't think I got the wrong house. I recognized them and they recognized me, but regardless, I phoned Amy and told her what happened, and asked her if she was sure that was their address. I stopped thinking about it for a little while until 2 weeks ago. Amy texted me saying he wasn't in any of her yearbooks, and sure as hell I checked mine and he wasn't there. We met up a few days ago and we both went in separate rooms to draw what we thought Brendan looked like, just in case he was a shared hallucination. But no, we both came back with pretty similar drawings, down to the way he parted his hair and the location of his 3 facial moles. So in the last few days, we've been going down a rabbit hole of talking to old teachers and friends, and I swear to God, it's like he never existed. We even went down to our old middle school to see if he was in any of the class photos, and nothing. I also got some old birthday photos from my mum, and on most of those birthdays I'm 100% certain Brendan was there, but again, nothing. Not even my parents remember him. Me and Amy went to check hospital records for some kind of birth certificate, but it's really starting to scare both of us. Is there some kind of explanation for this? If it was just me, I'd think I dreamt him up, but Amy pointed out the correct address, and we both came up with near-identical drawings of him. I'm pretty sure we're not mistaking his appearance for someone else either, because the facial markings were pretty distinct, and he got bullied for it in elementary school. Shortly after, we went back to visit Brendan's parents, and told them that we had been looking for Brendan, seeing his birth certificate's a public record and all, not that we could find him. I'm pretty sure they thought we were crazy, but surprisingly did cooperate. We showed them the sketches we did, and asked if they'd ever fostered any kids, but nothing. They agreed to let me tour the house, but not Amy, as they didn't know her. And first of all, Amy and I were right about the location of his bedroom and his closet. According to his parents, it's just a storeroom though. There's not a single photo of him in the house either. I don't think his parents are lying. They honestly seem to think they don't have a son. I also asked them more about our relationship, how I knew them and how they knew me, but they didn't really give me any new information. I babysat and helped out around the house, etc., and that was it. Because of Corona, we have to be careful the way we contact people, but we've already got in touch with old teachers and classmates, and they don't seem to know anything about Brendan. I don't have a lot of answers. I guess It's a dead end. Perhaps it was just a glitch, and honestly I have no idea. My mum did reply back to me recently, as I've been messaging her, and she has no idea who the person me and Amy drew was. In any case, I'm going to assume it was some kind of weird glitch, but I just don't understand how we can both remember someone, well, who seemingly doesn't exist and never did. I was 14 years old when I had to live with my grandparents. I had to live with them because my sister was in college and my parents were divorced. They lived in this old bungalow-type house. It was one story, and we have stairs that immediately go up to the attic. An attic which no one really uses. We just put stuff in there. It's too hot and stuffy up there anyway. The sole window up there didn't really help. The attic had an old, creaky wooden floor that I remember that I had to polish with a coconut shell, because that's how we do it here in the Philippines. That, and my grandparents are very traditional. The door to my room was near the stairs leading up to the attic. Like, you open my door and then face right, and the stairs would be immediately there. I hated that every time I left my room, I would see them, because it's almost like I would expect something to crawl down from there. One night, my grandparents had to pick up my aunt's family from the airport, but because of the hellish traffic here, they had to leave at 7 p.m, and their expected arrival back home would be around 5 a.m. at most. So, as a 14-year-old girl being home alone at night, I told them that I would be safe and fine. We live in a gated community, and we have plenty of guard dogs, so everything would be okay. Or so I thought. Before they left, we already had dinner, so I was stuck with cleaning the dishes and all of that. Whilst I was cleaning them, I could hear a bunch of neighboring dogs barking. It didn't really bother me, because they're dogs, they always bark. Once I was done, I locked every door and window and turned off all the lights before heading to bed. As I got into my room, the lights were on and everything looked normal. My anime posters were on the walls, my closet was untouched, my bed was next to my barred tinted windows that we had to tint because I was on the first floor, and my grandparents wanted to make sure no one would peep into a young girl's room. They were barred too, because my uncle, who used the room, always escaped through there to get to parties, and this was my grandparents' solution to that. Of course, they never got them removed. Nothing was out of place to alarm me. Everything was normal. That is until I turned off the lights. As soon as I hit the switch, a silhouette of a man was illuminated by the streetlight outside. He appeared to have thick curly hair, a skinny build, and I thought that I was having a hallucination. I turned the lights on again and he was gone, and then I flipped the switch once more to reveal him once again. I sighed in relief. I obviously was just tricking myself, or perhaps something else was casting a shadow. I double-locked my door to be safe, one with the doorknob locked, and one of those door latch type locks, and tucked myself in. It was hard to fall asleep because of all the dogs barking outside. They weren't our dogs, it was the neighbors. But I was finally falling asleep when I heard something move from above me. Something in the attic. I pushed the thought to the back of my mind that I must be tricking myself, and I hugged my pillow, trying to tell myself that it was just rats. These rats seemed heavy. They were also pushing my furniture around. My heart sank when I heard them hurriedly go down the stairs and stop at the bottom. I covered myself with my blanket and I waited for something. I was also wishing that my parents had given me a phone, but I waited with bated breath. Suddenly I heard my doorknob being gently fiddled. I wanted to vomit when I heard a click, followed by a quiet turn of the knob. The knob turned but didn't budge. When they noticed, they tried to push it. This time I had finally stood up, shaking. I was a kid, home alone with no phone, no means of defense. All that was saving me was this thick door from the old days. I softly pushed my body up against the door and locked everything up again. I didn't want to make a sound and didn't want to scream and didn't want him to know I was there. I don't know why he stopped, but he did. I didn't get back to bed though. I sat there at the door waiting. It felt like forever. I heard footsteps ascend the stairs, but I was just still sat there. I saw something move from the corner of my eye. There, out the window, the shadow was back. I forced myself not to look, and all I could think of was thank goodness they were barred. I don't remember what happened after that. I think I probably passed out from exhaustion, or was just so scared that I fell asleep. Either way, I remember the next day when my family and I were finally having breakfast, and I casually brought it up with my grandfather that I thought I heard footsteps in the attic last night. My grandmother scoffed. It's probably rats. I never brought it up again. I didn't want them to worry. It probably was. Right? Our dogs were caged up near the gate and were far from my room, so they wouldn't have seen anything. The only dogs who could have been near my room, via proximity, were of course the neighbours. There was also nothing outside my window that could cast a shadow to look like a man. And lastly, the attic window, when I investigated, was propped open. I was having a conversation about urban legends with my boyfriend and his friend who was in town. He's a stand-up comedian. And the topic of, no, I actually know someone who that happened to came up. Here's my story. Back in 2003, I worked in a clothing store, known for its inexpensive t-shirts, at a mall in a smaller northern city in central Massachusetts. I'm a taller woman, just a hair shy of 5'11", with a small/medium hourglass frame, light hair, light eyes. I was 18 when this happened. My friend that I worked with met up for me to pick up my check and hers and scheduled a little shop. She, no joke, was 4'11" and still looks like she's 12, even though she's now in her 30s. We were both pretty active in the hardcore scene at the time, but I looked a little more clean-cut than her, as she likes piercings and I liked tattoos. We were parting ways since we parked in the same lot but different sections. I gave her a hug and walked away, and heard someone call, "Miss?" and turned around. It was a short, fat guy with a bottle in his hand coming towards me. "Miss, I got this perfume for my wife. Will you smell it for me and tell me if it's good?" "No, piss off," I replied, and kept walking to my car, taking my Nokia out to call Jackie as I walked over. The dude persisted and started hitting notes of agitation in his voice, following me still, increasing the speed of his pace, saying he just needed me to smell it. Jackie answered, "Some guy is following me, drive down my road." He heard me on the phone and stopped following me. Jackie drove up alongside me moments later and described the guy, asking if it was him, which I confirmed. "He got into some van and drove away," she said. In hindsight, we should have called the cops, but information on people being taken and such in 2003 wasn't what it is now. Instead, we just went on the running joke that I was worth more than her because she had a ton of facial piercings. So when you saw that chain email forwarded going around about men chloroforming young women to sell them, I hope you actually paid attention. It almost happened to me. This story was relayed to me by a colleague and friend. Before joining our organization, this colleague worked as a tour guide. At the time of this story, he worked for a tour company that specialized in Japanese and Korean tourists, and he was assigned to work the trips going to the east coast of Peninsular Malaysia. It should be noted that there is now a major highway that links the East Coast and the West Coast, but at the time the highway was in the process of being built, and while most of the highways were intact, there were still stretches where you would need to take the trunk roads through towns and villages before rejoining it some miles ahead. He was supposed to meet a small group of Japanese tourists at the airport and escort them on their small bus to Kwantan, a major tourist town in the East Coast, which is more than 4 hours away at the time. The weather was bad that night, and the plane was delayed. By the time they go on their way, it was already 9 p.m., a little more than an hour out of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia's capital. A member of the little tour group asked my friend if there was somewhere they could stop to get something to eat, because he and the tour members were famished. My friend said he would do what he could. He then asked the same to the driver. This man was not the regular driver, he was standing in for the regular who had taken ill. So the driver said he didn't know that he would look for an all-night place along their way. By that time they had reached a section of the highway that was under construction. Thus, they had to take the parallel road. They drove a little further when the driver and my friend saw an open-air restaurant, which seemed to be quite lively, just after a small town they'd passed. So they stopped there. The tour group alighted and went about getting their refreshment. My friend helped them with translations, and he also got some food for himself and the driver. Less than an hour later, they were back on the bus and heading to Kuantan. All tourists were very happy with their stop, because they said the food was excellent. A few days later, they were on their way back to the West Coast with the same tour guide. But it was daytime, and this time the regular driver was driving. A tour member asked my friend if they could stop at the place where they had stopped on their first day. Again, my friend said he would see what he could do. He told the driver, and the driver asked him to describe the place, which he did. The driver's face then went pale. A little later they came to a place that seemed familiar to my friend, and the driver asked him, "Is that the place you mean?" Pointing to a patch of land where a rundown building stood surrounded by what was once a clearing with a few tables and broken chairs. There was also tall grass everywhere. My friend recognized the place. It was indeed the very same where they'd stopped a few days earlier. He turned to the tour group and informed them that they would not be able to stop at the place that they went to earlier because it was only opened at night. They sighed but left it at that. Later, when they could talk privately, my friend asked the driver about the place. The driver informed him that the place had indeed been a restaurant with outdoor eating areas around it, but it had been abandoned for a year since something terrible happened there and the business went under. The driver did not know what the terrible incident was, but it did lead to more than one death. That stretch of highway has since been completed, and the parallel road is only rarely used. I've used that road once to see if I could find a place. I followed my friend's description, and I think I found it, but there were only the remains of an old building with tall grass around it. Perhaps I should try going there at night, if only to see if the food was really that good. This happened to a friend of mine who lived in the same neighborhood as me when we were about 8 to 9 years old. My friend Emily and her family lived just a few houses down the street from mine. We lived in a neighborhood where almost everyone knew each other. The biggest worry we had was that some outsider would come into the neighborhood and cause trouble. Some people even left their homes unlocked because they felt that safe. There was an incredibly nice family that lived directly across the street from Emily's house. A mum, a dad, and a 16-year-old son, and their other mentally challenged son who was 22 years old, called Tim. Tim was always home because he wasn't employed due to his disability, but his parents were working full-time and his brother had school. All day, every day, he would be outside, waving and smiling at anyone who drove or walked by. Big smiles, showing all his teeth and sometimes giggling, just out of the pure excitement and happiness of interacting with other people, since he spent most of his time alone. He was not creepy. One day, Emily was sick and didn't go to school. Even though she was only about 8 or 9 years old, Emily was allowed to stay home sick by herself. Plus, her mum was going to be home around 2 anyway, since she only worked part-time and the neighborhood was safe. Right? Emily locked all the doors except the one that led to the garage. They used this as their front door because it was an easier way to access the home. You just park your car in the garage and go through the side door. This is obviously not the safest way to protect your home from intruders, but we literally all did it. As if a flimsy garage door could keep anyone from getting in if they wanted to. The worst part is that they had an outside cat and kept the garage door cracked just enough for him to get inside for his food and shelter if he needed it. So Emily's asleep, feeling sick with a fever. All the doors and windows are locked, except the door leading to the cracked garage door. Tim was bound to know she was home alone, since he was outside the front of his house the whole time. Emily wakes up to a pounding on the front door. Startled, she walks downstairs and looks through the peephole. It's Tim. She cracks the door, and he says something along the lines of how he notices everything, and would guard her home since she's home alone. She says thanks, but there was no need, and to have a good day. It was beautiful weather. He got angry. You think I can't do it because I'm dumb? But watch and see because I'm not dumb. She apologized and didn't mean it like that, but that she had to rest now. She dozed off and woke up to a noise downstairs in the kitchen, which happened to be the room the door from the garage led to. She hadn't heard the garage door open, but she was sick, so she figured she was in a deep sleep and simply hadn't noticed. Being completely disoriented from time, she looked over at the alarm clock. It was only 10:20, far too early for her mother to be home. At that moment she heard the noise again. She didn't call out. She had been sleeping in her parents' bedroom and ran into the bathroom, slamming the door loudly. She then remembered that this particular bathroom door did not have a lock on it. The noise she made slamming the door alerted the intruder to where in the house she was, and the big footsteps started to ascend. She moved quickly and quietly to her parents' closet, which was on the other side of the room. She closed the door and hid behind some clothes, all the time thinking how someone would have gotten inside. She remembered that the garage door was cracked for the cat, slightly, but not close enough for a thin person to slip underneath. Tim walks into the bedroom. Tim is tall and thin, and she can see him through the slatted closed doors. She sees him holding a weapon, and did everything she could not to scream. The sheen of it made her panic. He quickly went to the master bathroom where she was just moments before. These cookie-cutter houses only had about 3 floor plan layouts, so it wasn't hard for him to find. He looked inside the bathroom and didn't see her, then started making loud, throaty noises like someone would if they were frustrated or angry. While pacing the entire house, she stayed in the closet for hours, even after she heard him exit through the front door. She stayed there until her mother got home. She was crying hysterically and told her mother what happened. Had she not been so upset, and had one of their kitchen knives not been left by the front door, her mum might have blamed it on being delirious from a high fever, because no one would expect Tim to do that. The police were called and an official report was filed. I'm not sure if he had any charges pressed against him, because after she told me the story once, she refused to talk about it again. I overheard her parents a few times talking about the situation to my own parents, but never heard what the consequences were. Emily was so traumatized she went to therapy afterwards for several years, and still wouldn't talk to anyone about it because she didn't want to remember nor relive the experience. We even moved into an apartment together years and years later for college purposes. She never talked about Tim. It was like he never existed, and I never asked. I noticed she always locked the front door, which you should, of course, and the one that led to the patio and balcony, even though we were on the 7th floor. I always locked her bedroom door, to which she added an additional lock. And when she locked all of these doors and windows, she would always check 3 times, every single one. I often wonder if there was more to the story that Emily wanted to tell me. We were kids after all, and sometimes kids don't know how to explain the things they don't understand. It's terrifying to think about what his intentions were, and if he perhaps did find Emily, and something else happened. As horrifying as the experience must have been for her, it made a huge statement in the neighborhood for everyone to be more careful. I will always make sure everything is locked. When I was 17, I worked in a large mall at Vans. I had a lot of creepy older guys come in and flirt with me, but one guy took the cake. One day I was working the usual busy as hell Saturday nights, and there were 4 very tall men that asked me for my help getting shoes. I worked at an outlet, so the store was large with tall racks. The mall I worked in was extremely popular amongst locals and tourists alike. The mall has some history for people being taken and a hotspot for it. So anyway, the men said that they were from Nigeria, and they were pretty chill at first until they began to flirt. One man kept saying he has a son in Nigeria and asked if I wanted to wed him. I laughed because I thought he was joking, but suddenly he looked extremely offended. I was awkward and began talking about shoes, but the man interrupted me by saying how great his son was and that I would make a great wife. At that point I grew uncomfortable because I didn't want to be rude, so I asked for a coworker to come over and take care of them as I went to the bathroom. Everything was normal for the remainder of my shift. I clocked out and was waiting for my dad to come pick me up. I usually walked around the halls of the mall as I waited. The music was soothing and all was calm. I walked past the restroom hall and saw figures standing in my peripheral. I glanced and saw the 4 men from earlier. I was in full-on panic mode at that point, but played it off. I smiled at them softly and kept walking so they didn't think I was being rude. Sure enough, they began following me. I picked up my pace, hoping to find other people walking around, but there weren't any. I was speed walking, but the guys were keeping pace with me. My thoughts were to just go to the bathroom so that I could lose them, so I entered the next restroom hall. I walked slowly, thinking I had lost them, but soon after I heard pounding footsteps in a hurry. I looked back and they were coming right after me. I didn't think the bathroom was an option anymore, and I started yelling for help. I ran straight to the employee corridor of the mall. Right when I got there through the doors, a security guard met me on the other side. I bumped into him and never felt more relieved in my whole life. The men took off the other way, and the guard let me stay in his office until my dad came. Thank God for that guard. If he wasn't there, I probably even wouldn't be sharing this with you now. As for those guys, let's not meet. We were on holiday in Japan and walking near Mount Fuji. My son was 2.5, and running off a little bit in front of us, as kids do, when he turned a corner and went out of our sight. I hurried up to check the bend he was round and reached it just a few seconds after him. But he was vanished and was completely gone. I couldn't see him anywhere, so I panicked. I dropped my pack and set off at a dead sprint, traveling way more ground than he could have possibly done, worried that he'd been taken or wandered off the trail but couldn't find any sign of him. So I sent my wife to get help while I went to search. Back in Russia, I was SAR and good at tracking lost people. but there was nothing to show any direction he'd gone. The authorities came and searched, but couldn't find him either. Then 2 hours later he reappeared, in basically the same spot we lost him, happy, giggling and clean like he hadn't gone anywhere and just taken his previous step. To this day we have no explanation as to where he went. He was too little to describe it to us. Besides, 2 hours with no dirt on his pants or needing a diaper change was practically impossible for him. It freaked me out, and I really wanted to share this with you guys. I was 18 years old and worked in a mall clothing store. I usually worked the night shift, which meant leaving the store between 9 or 9:30. None of us thought anything about calling out good nights or walking out to our cars alone. Usually the parking lot was full of all the other workers leaving at the same time. On this particular night I was in a great mood. I had had a good evening at work and was going to meet up with my boyfriend when I got home. So I was just smiling and thinking to myself as I walked. I got to the curb in front of the mall exit door to check for oncoming cars before I crossed over to where my car was parked. It was not that far away, maybe 10 spaces from the front, when I glanced up to verify where my car was. I caught the eyes of a man sitting in his truck. He was wearing a cowboy hat, pulled down low over his eyes, as though to try and conceal his face, but he was staring intently right at me. I literally froze in place, and I have never felt fear like I did in that moment. I snapped out of my trance, and then I ran as fast as I could past his truck into my car, which was only spaces away. This was before key fobs, so I needed my keys to unlock the door. I always made fun of scary movies when the girl ran and dropped the keys trying to get in, but it really does happen that way. I was shaking so badly I could not get the key in the door, and then I dropped the damn things. I felt like I was in a cheesy movie. Seconds later, I was sitting in the car and shaking so badly, I had to sit there a moment or two before I could drive off. He had not chased me. He did not leave, but continued to sit there. Later in the evening, after I'd finally calmed down, I felt like an idiot thinking I'd gotten scared of someone's husband picking up his wife after work. The next day I returned to work, same night shift, and told everyone at work what happened and how scared I'd been, and made fun of myself for being such a chicken, but made sure that someone walked out with me later that night. I stood at the door of the mall ready to run back in if I saw anything off, but he wasn't there. I exhaled, and my friends and I went to our cars, relieved that everything was okay. The following days at work, there was no talk of my fright from 2 nights ago, and it was business as usual. About halfway into my shift, my manager walked up to me and said she needed to talk. She turned around and walked up to a cop that I had not noticed was in the store. Curious, I walk over, and my manager wanted me to tell the cop about what happened. I felt silly telling him some story, because nothing really had happened. When I finished telling him, he started questioning me about the truck. Did I know which model it was exactly? The color? The year? I finally said something about I did not want to get anyone in trouble, that I had just been freaked out a little, but it was no big deal. The cop then explained that the night before, one of the ladies leaving for the night had been taken, driven around in the back of the mall into an unlit area, and was beaten, and something terrible had happened to her. I felt myself get lightheaded and my vision went back for a moment, with it drawing on me that I had seen the guy. My description of the truck matched the description of the victims. Her guy was not wearing a cowboy hat, was the only difference in our description. That was the beginning. Our city now had several serial people, and it took them several years to catch them. His wife figured out it was her husband and turned him in. That was a scary time, and women were terrified to be out alone after dark. At our mall, and I imagine others, no one was allowed to leave alone. The mall parking lot was now lit up 360, and they had security on site making sure we were all safe. We all started a call chain between the stores to let everyone know if you saw anyone that made you suspicious or frightened, so that everyone would be aware and on their guard. And I always felt guilty for that woman being attacked. I'm 22 years old and 5'1", or at least I was when this following event took place. I'm not a very intimidating person. I work as a kindergarten teacher, and I would meet parents and other family members all the time. I've made extremely good relationships with all my students and good impressions on their caretakers. One day, about a month ago, we got a new transfer student from another school on the other side of town. Right off the bat, I hated his dad. He was creepy and would always look at me with a certain look. I brushed it off at first because I've had male caretakers hit on me before since I was single at the time. The child was weird. He would bully kids in the strangest way. He would tell kids that he wanted to do really horrific things to them, which, in turn, led to a conference with the dad and child after school, and he didn't seem angry or uncomfortable like I would assume most parents to be. He just wore a small smile like he was trying to hide his pride. He never took his eyes off my mouth, and it made me extremely uncomfortable. We terminated the conference and agreed he would not have recess for a week. Months went by. I got a boyfriend, and we were walking in an outdoor shopping mall on a date when I felt eyes on us, like eyes burning into the back of my head. We walked into a furniture store and my boyfriend looked so uncomfortable. "There's a man that's been following us. Let's go," he whispered to me. I didn't say anything, but he knew I agreed. We left the store, and he wrapped his arm around my head. "Miss Kay," I heard behind me. I turned around, and it was the child and the dad. "We saw you walking and thought we'd come say hi," he smirks. He looks at my boyfriend and glares at him. He's 6'3" and has the build of a Viking, but is extremely fit, beard and all. He could be considered extremely intimidating, but he's just what we tell you. John. "This is John, my husband," I smiled. I lied about it because I knew that if some guys hear the word husband, they back off. The dad seemed very put off by this, like he was going to attack him. We awkwardly spoke for a moment, and then left and drove on. 4 years later, John and I did get married. We moved to a new home, and it had many windows and was gorgeous. We had put metal stoppers on the windows because we didn't trust people, even though it was a fairly nice neighborhood. John and I one day were spring cleaning when we felt like someone was watching us. John was next to me washing the top of the fridge, and I instinctively looked out the window to see a car across the street. I asked John if he knew who it could be, and he said no. He closed the blinds, being a bit creeped out by it. That night we were falling asleep on the couch, and in the living room we had two extremely large windows that faced the backyard. John had already fallen asleep, and I was still watching TV when I heard a weird metallic tapping on the glass. I played it off and used my peripherals to look out the window and caught a glimpse of a shadow passing by. It was at this point that I awoke John. I told him someone was at the window and thanked God for my great taste in men. He used to be a police officer and even till now is a firefighter. We keep a crowbar next to the front door and a metal bat behind the couch. He grabs the bat, hands it to me, and he slowly walks around to the dining room, and under the table is a firearm which he keeps for emergencies. I dialed 911 and heard John run out the front door quickly. "I am armed and have no problem with hurting you," he yells, since it's like 1:15 in the morning and couldn't get the license plate. We filed a report, and the cops who came knew John and said they would have someone patrol the house for a week or so. Fast forward a month-ish later, we were in bed, and I happened to need to pee at 3 in the morning. I came out the bathroom and felt someone grab my face. I had no fighting experience whatsoever, so didn't even know how to defend myself. The bathroom door swings in, and there's a towel bar behind it, so when the door is hit, it's super loud. So I slammed my arm against the door, and John is a very light sleeper, and I was praying he would hear it. I felt really drowsy and felt the person dragging me, and woke up in the hospital and saw John in the chair next to me. I asked him what happened, and he said he grabbed the metal pipe from under the bed and attacked the man. He shattered his jaw and broke both his knees. When the man was unconscious, John turned on the light to see it was the dad. He called the police, and I'm apparently mildly allergic to chloroform. To this day, we have no idea how he got into the house. The front and back doors have glass, so we lock the glass and the main doors before going to bed. We never open the windows further than the guards, and there are screens on them too. There was no sign of forced entry and no fingerprint anywhere from the guy. Now, I'm putting my doctorate to good use and teaching at the university. They're much more tolerable, and I feel safer since the university is simply a few blocks away from the fire station. To that kid, I hope you grow out of this weird sadistic phase. And to the dad, I hope you rot in jail and that we never meet again. In the summer of 1993, I moved into an efficiency apartment in a high-rise building. I had a nice apartment on the 9th floor with a great view of the city. There was one large L-shaped room, a separate kitchen, and a separate bathroom. This was my first apartment, and my first time ever living alone, and I was looking forward to making it look nice. I had my bed in one part of the apartment, and just before you enter the main area near the windows, and I wanted to create some separation between the sleeping and living areas. A friend of mine showed me a catalogue from a company called Tiger Direct, although they are known primarily for electronics. At the time, they had a variety of items available in their catalogue, including a wicker screen which I could set up between the bed and the living areas, giving me the separation I wanted. It was exactly what I was looking for. It looked nice and was affordable, so I decided to go ahead and purchase it. Here is where it gets interesting. This was still several years away from the internet being a household thing. At the time I owned a computer, a PC clone with a 386 processor, and had a modem and an account with CompuServe. This plays no role in the story except to illustrate how different things were back then. This was still several years, even before America Online. At the time there were no companies taking orders over the internet. For one thing, there was no secure way to transmit funds. For another, not enough people had computers yet to make it a practical way to sell to the general public. So I ordered this the old-fashioned way. The catalogue had an order form inside. I pulled out the order form and filled it out with a pen. I wrote my new address, filled out the order number and desired quantity, and added up the total. I marked off the box indicating I would pay by check. I took out my checkbook and wrote a check to cover the cost. I put the order form and the check in an envelope, put a stamp on the envelope, and dropped it in the outgoing mailbox in the lobby of my apartment building. When I did this, the mail had already been picked up. The mailman wouldn't come by until the end of the next day for the rest of the outgoing mail. I figured it would take about 5 days for the mail to be sorted at the post office, sent on its way, and arrive to the destination to be delivered to Tiger Direct, and then routed to the order fulfillment office. I figured it would take a few days for them to deposit my check, and then determine it had cleared. I figured it would take another day to pack up my wicker screen and ship it out, and then about 5 or so more days to travel back across the country to me. So all told, I figured it would take at least 3 weeks before I could expect receiving my package. But the package arrived the very next day. When I got home from work the next day, there was a slip in my mailbox telling me I had a package, and there was the package from Tiger Direct with my name on it. When I took it upstairs and opened it, inside was the screen I had decided to order the night before. I cannot explain how this possibly could have happened. There's no way that Tiger Direct could have even seen my order yet, let alone fulfilled it. And yet here it was, in my apartment. And this was way before internet banking. I had to wait several weeks before getting my bank statement in the mail. My check to Tiger Direct had cleared about 10 days after I wrote it, which was the time I would have expected it to clear. This means my check cleared 9 days after I received my purchase. I never tried to contact the company. For one, it would have been a long-distance call, and for another, what would I have said? I'd like to complain about how fast I received my item. I did tell a couple of friends at work and they both laughed, and I think they thought I was exaggerating how quickly it came. I even half-heartedly tried to convince myself that I was exaggerating as well. But I wasn't. I received a package in the mail before the company could have possibly known I had even ordered it, which meant they would have had to have sent it to me days before I even heard of Tiger Direct. And to this day, I have no explanation for how in the world this happened. This happened to me when I was around 5. My parents, siblings and I went to the mall for back-to-school shopping. I was with my mum and sister while my dad was shopping with my little brother somewhere around the store. We were by the sunglasses section and for some reason I stopped and got distracted, looking at some really cool polarized glasses. I'm sure a few minutes passed, and next thing I know my mum and sister weren't around. I start to freak out and I'm extremely worried that I won't be able to find them. A little later a man in his late 30s or early 40s shows up and asks me where my parents are. I tell him I don't know and that I'm lost. He nicely offers to help me look for my mummy and daddy. He grabs me by the hand and we start walking towards the door. I kept on telling him that my mummy and daddy are probably somewhere inside and haven't left yet. The man says we'll go and see if his parents' car is still somewhere in the parking lot. On our way out, my dad sees me holding hands with this complete stranger. My dad calls out my name and runs towards me. And I remember the guy just leaving and not even acknowledging my dad. Who knows what would have happened to me? When I was 14, I had an appointment at a bank with my mum. She wanted to set up an account for me. So one afternoon we were downtown in the bank building, and I remember feeling really bored by the whole process. It was that kind of dry financial stuff, and I would rather stay home and play video games or something. My mum noticed after a few minutes, and then confirmed with the bank employee that I was actually just needing to sign the papers in the end, and for everything else I didn't really need to be there. We were already downtown, and my mum gave me a bit of money and told me to buy myself new clothes. I did not care about my appearance at all back then, and always looked kind of sluggish. The whole thing would take about an hour, so it would be fine if I were back by then. I went to the mall first, since I knew there were some cheap stores. While I was browsing some clothes, I noticed an older man around 60. There wasn't anything creepy or remarkable. I just thought he was weird, seeing someone that age in a store that is predominantly for young people. I then noticed that this guy kept appearing at stores I was at in the mall, almost like he was following me. I shrugged it off at first, but then I realized he actually was. I even tried to make a little game out of it, and it soon became clear he would always go into or near the stores which I entered. Now I was a naive boy. Besides from the fact that he was following me, there was nothing weird to this old man at all, so I couldn't even have imagined his actual intentions. I just thought he was some bored geezer who liked to play shop detective in his free time, and maybe he mistakenly thought I had stolen something when I was in the first store. Yep, I was pretty dumb back then. When I left the mall, the guy still followed me through the city. I wasn't scared, just slightly irritated, but I chose to ignore him for the time being and just take care of the shopping. When I entered the next store, he didn't seem to follow me at first, but then while I was choosing some clothes in the upper level, I noticed him again a few shelves away. I went to the changing room to try on some of the stuff I bought, and that's when I heard slow steps approach the booth I was in. I knew it was him, and thought it was kind of creepy, but still didn't fully grasp what was going on. He didn't linger there too long, but he remained at the store, which I left after deciding not to buy it. At this point I'd had enough. After leaving the building, I immediately hid behind one of the pillars that led to the entrance. I saw him exit the store and look for me, but he didn't notice me and went away. I thought I was rid of him. The problem was the bank building where my mother waited was in the same direction that the stalker just went. I decided it would be safer to wait a bit, so I went into the McDonald's opposite of the clothing store and got myself a burger. And then, while I was eating outside of the McDonald's, the guy actually came back. At this point, I had had enough. It was obvious the guy wasn't any kind of shop detective, so what the hell did he want? I was really annoyed at him for following me and creeping me out, but I also was kind of curious what his deal was. What I did next, please, never do this. I would have never have done it had I known what he wanted. I lured him away. At the end of the street there was this nice breakfast place, which closes in the afternoon. So, at that time there weren't any people near the benches and chairs in the front place. I sat down on one of the benches and nervously played around with my MP3 player. I knew what I was doing was dangerous, but my curiosity got the better of me, and as weird as it may sound, I felt also kind of thrilled. It didn't take long for the stalker to sit down on the bench opposite me. He didn't introduce himself or ask my name. He just started some small talk and told me he's not from here, but I looked like I could show him around. This still felt really weird to me, but I was kind of relieved as he didn't come off as a bad guy, which is dumb on my part. I told him politely I didn't have time, since I had to go back soon to see my mum. He asked if I had enough time to show him just one place, the park. I asked him which park he wanted to go to, but he replied that any park would do. Something really started to feel off here. Lucky there was one nearby that was really easy to find, so I started explaining the directions to him, but he interrupted me, saying he wanted me to take him there personally. I agreed and started to lead the way, but as we were walking, and neither of us said anything, I slowly realized what was happening. I froze in place, and he turned back and looked at me, asking if I did not want to go to the park with him anymore. I panicked and screamed no, which caused a lot of people to turn towards us, as this was happening in a very busy place. He just said, bye, and left, while I immediately ran back to the bank building to tell my mum what happened. She was still speaking with the bank employee from before. My mum got angry and told me if anyone ever tries to do that again, I should kick them down, which is really questionable advice to give a child, but that's kind of how my mum shows support. In any case, strange creepy dude with bad intentions. Let's not meet again. 2008, Francis Scott Key Moore. I'll never forget the day my instincts saved my friend. I had gone to the mall with my childhood friend Sarah. We had actually been catching up. I never had many friends in school, and in high school me and her never had the same classes, and life outside of school for me was mostly sleep. So this was as good a time as any for us to catch up. Sarah was petite, small and skinny, but I'd never call her frail. I was a tall, heavy-set dude with a bad limp. She would often joke that she felt safer with me because I looked like a big scary bear, and the limp made me look like a badass who always won. She knew I hated being seen as scary, but would often tease, and this small walk would be no different. About 2 hours of walking around, we had been leaving Hot Topic when I felt like I was being watched, and we were being watched. I finally caught the eye of some guy in sunglasses, a tan shirt, grey jacket, and black dress shoes looking at us from across the center of the mall. The most offsetting thing was him. He was clean cut, clean shaved, short black hair. Everything about him screamed official, but his clothes looked like he had grabbed them off the floor and tossed them on. At first I thought he was a cop in regular attire, and that I had once again been falsely accused of stealing. Little background. The owner of the mall's Walden Books had taken a strong disliking to me after I accidentally busted their theft sensor 2 years prior by falling over onto one while being stupidly distracted talking to someone else. But he never said anything, nor got close to us to try and stop us. I decided I wanted to see what he was really up to, and that led us into Sears. Sure enough, he followed. I didn't tell Sarah about him, but made a decision. There was a hall to our left for restrooms down by the service bays and waiting rooms, and a good 12 or so feet ahead was electronics. I asked Sarah to wait for me by electronics while I went to the bathroom. There. Now I'd know for sure, as he had to pass this hall, and that would mean I'd have to turn around and walk towards him a bit down the hall. His pace slowed a bit when he saw us splitting up. I glared him down as I came his way, and he then turned down the hall pretending to look at phones, using it as a mirror. He clearly looked at me as his head turned, but he continued straight past the hall. I turned into the bathroom doorway, and as soon as he was beyond view of the hall, I turned around. My turn, I muttered to myself and laughed a bit. I felt like a kid playing spy. I had guessed this guy might notice me, so I came out of the hall and made my way towards tools. This tools section wasn't separated by any walls, but just by the walkway giving me a clear view and cover behind toolboxes and shelves. He was following Sarah now, but still keeping a good distance. What annoyed me about this was that Sarah never got that feeling of being watched and looked over like I had. In fact, both times she looked at him had been only as turning to look around the store. Now I needed to know, but I wasn't going to cause a scene, or so I thought. I walked over from tools. Sarah saw me coming and joined me. We went back into the mall and then headed for a mall exit. Sarah had started to ask me why we weren't heading towards our cars, but a simple hand motion from me cut the question out. We walked out, and he was a considerable bit behind us, so I rushed through the 2 sets of doors, giving them time to close. We walked to the edge of the overhang and stopped. I explained everything while pretending to look for our cars, and then turned around. In the area between the doors, there he stood, and now he had no way to go without avoiding both of us seeing him directly. He walked back in, and he had turned, standing against the side wall. I now stood in front of him. "What's up, Chief?" I asked, mocking a cop. Not a smart idea. But if he was a cop or even more security, then he'd have to call me out. He wouldn't look directly at us either. "Gonna say I stole something? I've been minding my own business. How about you mind yours?" I was now projecting at him, but he said nothing, and even having raised my arms at him, he didn't move and didn't dare look at either of us. I opened the next door and waved Sarah through, stopping the door almost touching his face. Sarah had hurried on ahead. I stepped through and the next few seconds remained frozen in my mind. He sighed almost as if relieved that I hadn't hit him with the door. I walked in and took a slow pace, and sure enough he followed. However, he hadn't noticed that I was now walking backwards. I backed right into him and my upper arm caught the feeling of a holster under his arm as we bumped into each other. In MD at the time, concealed carry by civilians wasn't legal, so I knew something was entirely out of place. I was pissed off, but also yelled, luckily as more security was around the corner. "Gun, he's got a gun!" I yelled. He backed away from me as more security came running up with a taser drawn. "She's lucky you're so annoying," he muttered as he continued towards the exit, and more security followed. I didn't stick around to find anything out. I ran for Sarah, grabbed her wrist, and took her through the mall towards the security office. The head of security in the office was not exactly thrilled to see me, but was aware of what had gone on. Apparently they had been watching since we entered Sears, and the tape showed them that the man had been following Sarah since she parked and had actually only started trying to hide himself when she met up with me. The most unreal part of all of this, though, they caught him but released him when he produced an official government ID and number 2. As you can imagine, we weren't best pleased. Why the hell was he following her? This kind of behavior is sick and unacceptable. I had a dentist appointment yesterday, so I had the day off. After coming home from the appointment, I went to CVS to grab some essentials and came back to do my laundry. While sorting through my lights and darks, I get a call from my coworker. Puzzled, I picked it up. "You said you were going to call when you got home. Is everything okay?" I figured she was just puzzled about my appointment, so I told her it all went well. But she already knew that. Apparently I came into work after my appointment, got a cup of coffee and talked to her about it already. She even knew the amount of cavities they said I needed filled, and I told her I'd call her when I got home. But I was never there. I was there yesterday, and I kept fighting with her over the phone about this fact, but she persisted. I wasn't there. I went right to CVS. I talked to the cashier for 10 minutes about his children, and I certainly wasn't at work. Maybe she got the days mixed up, but again, I wasn't there. At this point, I'm angered, slightly frustrated. My work is 3 blocks away, so I walk there and confront my coworker. She tells me exactly what happened. I apparently came in, went right back to the coffee pot, poured myself a cup, and stood in the doorway of the kitchen telling her about my appointment. Again, I told her that didn't happen. I haven't been there all day long. Surely I'm being punked. Surely Ashton Kutcher is about to pop out and say I've been had. So I go to my boss in the room where the coffee pot sits, and there's a camera pointing towards one of the 2 entrances. I ask her to pull the footage from that timestamp out of curiosity, and I could have crapped myself. I watched a woman my size, my weight, my hair color, and skin color walk through the door and over the pot, disappearing into the kitchen. However, some things are very different. Firstly, this person was wearing a completely different outfit than I had on that day, but it was still an outfit I owned. It was a very bright orange hoodie and a very unique pair of pants that I got at a local clothing store. Secondly, the person was wearing sneakers. I never wear sneakers. I always wear combat boots. Lastly, I don't like coffee enough to stop at my work just to have a cup. These, however, are the things that make me question what the hell is going on. First, I bounce when I walk and swing my arms back and forth. I have very long legs, which gives me a very large stride. Although you can't see the person's face, the walk and mannerisms are eerie similar. Those pants aren't commercially marketed. They didn't come from a company. They came from a designer who is a small, locally owned business owner. Third, her hair was dark green, and I dyed mine dark green a week ago. Still, just as dark and vibrant, and the hoodie was up the entire time. I wanted to see if I could get the footage from my boss, and I'm a little freaked out, because it's one thing if someone looks exactly like me and acts like me, but it's another to have a full-on conversation with my coworker and know exactly what to say and how I said it. I'm so confused. Should I dig deeper? Was this a glitch? What the hell happened today? I should probably preface this story by letting you know that I have a bit of a problem with being overly polite and setting boundaries. Because of this problem, I have many stories to share, but this is one of them. When I was 20, I was living with my then boyfriend in a not so nice part of town. We decided to walk up the local mall, which had withstood the test of time, to check out some books at Barnes & Noble's. I was super hungover and had basically rolled out of bed to go be with my boyfriend. After we looked around for a bit, I told my boyfriend I was going out to smoke and to meet me outside. While I was outside, I stood next to an old Lincoln Town car, cigarette in mouth, and I began rifling through my purse for a lighter. Just then, an older man stepped out the car, lighter in hand, and lit the cigarette for me. He asked me for my name and told me he was Fish. I told him my name, thanked him for the light, and began to back away. This guy was sketchier looking than my own unkept self that morning. Wait, he said, as he lightly touched his hand to the small of my back, directing me back to him. "Can I ask you a few questions?" Sure, but I really should get back to my boyfriend." "Oh, you have a boyfriend. That means you must like to make friends. Do you like to make friends?" he asked. At this point, he had directed me into a position where my back was at an outside corner of the wall, and I would have to push past him to walk away. "Yeah, I guess," I said. "What if I told you you could make money by just making friends?" he asked. I told him that I already had a job and that I needed to get back to my boyfriend. I moved to walk past him, but he held his hands up and positioned himself to keep me in place. "I have a friend that would really like to meet you. He's my boss, and he can help you make money. Why don't you just call your boyfriend and tell him to meet you later? You can come with me right now and meet my boss." At this point, my face must have showed some sort of panic because a young man approached us and asked me if I was okay. At first, the man who cornered me bristled and told the other man that we were in the middle of a business transaction. Thankfully for my weak ass, the new stranger stood his ground. The man then took a notepad out of his pocket, scribbled down a number, and thrust it at me before getting back into the car. I thanked the kind stranger and went back inside to meet my boyfriend and tell him about what happened. We ended up putting the phone number up on our fridge as a joke, but there has always been something that's bothered me about the situation. The man in the Lincoln had gotten out and back in on the passenger side. So who was in the driver's seat? At the time of this story, I was 17 and was living for a few years in a small house with my mum after my parents' divorce 6 years ago. The house wasn't huge, but we had one floor with our bedrooms and a small garden. We also have a dog who isn't really scary. It's one of those small dogs with a lot of hair. His biggest default is that he barks a lot during the day every time someone is close, near the garden perhaps. That annoyed me and the neighbors a lot. It's important to note that my dogs never bark at night and will always sleep in the bed with me. Anyway, one night, in the middle of the night, I had a dream where I heard a constant dog barking. In my dream, I felt like it lasted 1,000 years, but I think perhaps it only lasted a few seconds really. When I awoke from the nightmare, I didn't feel the weight of my dog on my feet. I felt like something was wrong, and then I realized my dog was actually barking and growling. I didn't understand what was happening. I just looked for my dog and saw him on the top of the stairs. His head turned towards the front door. The door opening on the garage was actually on the side of the front door. I jumped out of my bed and rushed to the top of the stairs where my dog was. There was a shadow of a man standing just near the bottom of the stairs next to the front door. I wasn't even able to shout. I just took my dog in my arms by reflex and ran towards my mother's room. My mother was just waking up. She takes medication for sleeping, so it's hard for her to wake up. Thank goodness the door of her bedroom can be locked with a key. Even though I was shaking like hell, I turned the key in the lock and locked the door. My mum understood what was happening when she heard the footsteps coming from the stairs. We froze in a corner of her bedroom, and she grabbed her cell phone to call police while we were trying to reach the cops. The guy started shaking the door handle and then punching the door. After a moment he stopped, and this psycho laughed. That's when my mum had the idea of shouting, "I called the police, get out." After a moment we heard him going down the stairs still laughing. We didn't dare move until we did hear the police officers. When they arrived, of course, no one was there. In the living room on the table, there was a note where he wrote, "See you soon." They said later that apparently the guy got in and out by way of the garage, which had a back door and was at the time always left open. Immediately after that, We went to live with my grandparents for a while and moved out to a new house some months later. We never heard of the guy again, but we always checked that every door was locked after going to bed, and I've had trouble sleeping ever since. For almost a year after, I would wake up at 4 a.m. just to make sure he hadn't found us and trying to sneak into our home once more. Lock your doors, people. About 10 years ago, I took my sister-in-law for the first time to Fredericksburg, Texas, from Austin. My father had lived there for about 20 years at that point, and is still the place I call home. Needless to say, I have been traveling from Austin to Fredericksburg for over 30 years now, and know every inch of the 30 miles it takes to drive there. For perspective, let me explain the route you have to take. From where we lived, you would take the 290 west from South Austin to Dripping Springs, where I remember telling my sister Nikki that is where my uncle and nephew lived. Nikki is from another state, and so all of this was totally new to her. From there you continue west on 290 until you hit a T in the highway at 281. From there you take a right and drive for roughly 2 minutes before you hit Johnson City. About a mile in, you turn left onto 290 west, which picks back up again and drives straight through downtown Johnson City. A few miles out from Johnson City is a tiny town called High, and then a few more miles down is Stonewall. It's another 15 miles from Stonewall to Fredericksburg. Now backing up, I remember hitting the Y at 290 and 281 because my husband had sent me a message and asked if I had gotten to Fredericksburg yet. I took my right on 290, as I have done hundreds of times, but after a few minutes I began to feel uneasy. I couldn't piece it, but something felt off. I felt like I couldn't get my bearings. Where was Johnson City, I thought? Shouldn't we be there by now? The longer we drove, the more weirded out I became, but I didn't say anything to Nikki. I just kept searching in front of me for the unforgettable neon Roadrunner sign you see when you first drive into Johnson City. It never came. I drove 70, never once having to decrease my speed until I happened to see a set of blinking lights above the road that didn't look familiar until I glanced over to see a road sign saying 3 miles to Fredericksburg. Somehow, I had skipped 3 towns. Needless to say, I flipped out, and Nikki was obviously very confused, as she had never made the trip before. When we got to my dad's house, I came in and immediately grabbed a map. I was sure somehow I'd found another way to get to Fredericksburg. But there is no other way. You cannot just keep driving and get there. When we came back, I took my sister at night. I know if we had driven through any of those towns, she would recognize them. I mean, how can you forget a huge neon roadrunner? Nope. She swore she'd never seen any of these towns before, the ones between Dripping Springs and Fredericksburg. As far as the time it took, it seemed like we drove 40 or so miles in 15 to 20 minutes. But honestly, I was so confused and shocked at the time that I didn't spend more time trying to figure out that part of it. I do not believe we missed hours of time. Rather, it seemed to take a lot less than it should have. I will say the whole area around there has a lot of stories about UFOs and other paranormal legends. I don't know what happened, glitch or something, but it still gives me and Nikki the creeps. I'm a scrawny teenager who looks pretty sketchy most of the time. I've had weird encounters relatively often. I'm at the mall and there's a store called Spencer's. For those of you who don't know, their back wall is basically covered in adult toys. I'm walking out the store opposite from Spencer's and see a 35-year-old man with 2 4-year-old girls walk in. I don't know his name, so I'll call him Psycho. I tried to help him out and say, "That's not the kind of store you want to bring little kids into." And the Psycho responds with, "Why don't you mind your own damn business?" I walk away about 15 feet before saying, "Because because there's a wall of toys that they shouldn't see at the back, and continue walking away. I turn around to see his reaction, only to see Psycho start running towards me. I break into a sprint to hopefully not get ended by some random nutjob, and hear from behind me, "Get back here, you little loser." I turn my head to see how far he is, and his face is the color of a lobster. After running 100 meters or so, I don't see Psycho anymore, and assume he went back to the two 4-year-olds he left in that shop. I was sorely mistaken. It turns out someone called more security because a 35-year-old tried to grab a teenager, and the place was swarming with more cops by the time I headed back there to see what happened to the kids. They found him near the last area he'd seen me, still trying to find me, and escorted him out of the mall without his children. I still have no idea what happened to them. I'm in my 40s, and thought today about an incident that occurred to me in the mid-90s. 1997 to be exact. The pre-millennium days. In 1997, I was in the Army National Guard, enrolled in college, and also working a part-time job. I was also a single mother with a 4-year-old. I was struggling quite a bit, but always smiling and friendly. No one was a stranger. I was raised in a rural area, so that's just how most people were. I moved to a new apartment in the city about 5 miles from my father's home, so I felt quite safe. I had lived in my apartment about 3 weeks, when one morning, while getting ready to leave for class, I heard a loud knock on the door. I opened it without questioning who it was, and there was this massive guy that had to be at least 6'4" or more, and over 250 pounds. This guy was normal looking, very fit with a maintenance belt on. He tells me he was the maintenance guy, and needed to look at my power box located in my room. I didn't know how he knew where to go, but I let him in, and it was at that point that a sense of terror washed over me, like a flood. I realized I had made a mistake. I was alone with this guy who went right back to my room. I remember wanting to sit and eat, but the terror felt so strong. I grabbed my backpack and rushed out to class. I was afraid to come home, but I didn't tell my dad. I didn't know what I was thinking. I came home alone late at night and looked under the beds and in my couch, and was relieved to find I was alone. I found a massive hole in my closet ceiling, large enough for a man to get through. A few days passed and I had convinced myself that maybe he was the maintenance man, and maybe I was paranoid for no reason. I went to the apartment manager and asked her when the maintenance man would be up to repair the hole in my ceiling. She grew pale and asked me to describe the man. She then informed me he wasn't the maintenance guy. The actual maintenance guy was an elderly gentleman who lived in the apartment below me. The hole was patched up, and I never, fortunately, saw the stranger again. The guy looked so normal, muscular, tall, and not bad looking, but obviously a person with ill intent. I looked up crimes where a man comes in posing as a maintenance man in the 90s, and there was a guy active from 85 to 98 in my state posing as a maintenance guy. He was caught and sent to prison, but I can't recall his name. Dude, I hope you're still locked up. This happened to me last summer when I was walking home at 4 a.m. My city is considered relatively dangerous by people from surrounding towns, but I've lived here my whole life and have never had much trouble, even when I lived in the most dangerous area. This, however, took place in the center of the city, which is considered safe. A friend and I were out drinking after a birthday party, so I was pretty smashed. After some beers, we eventually decided to go home. He lives in a totally different direction from me, so I had to walk home by myself. This is never a problem for me. I just put on my headphones and listen to some music while walking. As I'm walking beside a river towards the city mall, which is a big open concept building, I get passed by some guy It's staring at me quite creepily. I didn't think much of it. It's kind of a normal occurrence and it's usually harmless, so I let it go. I slow down a bit to change a song, and when I look up I see he's stopped walking completely a little further away from where I am now, and is quite obviously staring at me, waiting for me to get to the place he's at. Now I'm not the kind of girl who would tolerate such behavior, and I always confront people like this. As it turns out, they get scared when confronted and usually leave. Having this in mind, I take off my headphones, and when I reach and pass him, he starts walking right behind me and speaking something to me. I stop and tell him to leave me alone, that I know what he's up to and I'm not interested. This annoys him a lot. I continue walking and he walks right behind me, yelling at me, cursing at me, saying all these kinds of horrible names. You think just because that you're a girl you're better than me? I don't give a crap about you. I'll end you. I hate people like you, and whatnot. In my drunken, pissed off state, I just say something back to him a few times, which of course doesn't go very well. But being harassed like this really hits a nerve with me and I can't stand it. I, however, start realizing that he's getting closer, and there's literally no one around that can help me if he does decide to attack me. So I'm a little bit angry and getting concerned. As we reach the end of the mall, he's almost right behind me, still yelling some obscenities, at which point I decide to call a friend and quite loudly tell her that some creep is following me and threatening me through the mall, and ask her to stay on the phone, in case something happens. He was getting even pissier after I got off the phone, as he was mocking me for it, but apparently they also got scared as he disappeared after a while. I guess he took a turn somewhere and carried on walking in another direction, but he was no longer yelling nor walking behind me. I stop to take a breath and calm myself, and eventually exit the mall and reach a street where I see a cop car parked. I tried to report this to the cop sitting inside, but he told me to call 911, as this wasn't his problem, and went to a nearby casino, while the girl cop just repeated what he said and basically told me to just go home and that there's nothing they can do. Eventually I did. Never saw the guy again. But thanks, crappy police officers. This happened a year ago. I was on one of my hour breaks. I go to a park, swim some laps and eat, then walk back. As I'm walking to the park, some guy stops me, and he asks me in a very serious tone if I'm okay. I just say, yeah, I am. He then goes, yeah, you look okay. He walks off, and I look behind me thinking this guy is off, and see where he's heading so I can avoid him later. But he was just gone. He didn't cross the street or turn down a road, as it was a straight road surrounded by houses. This was extremely strange, so I shrugged it off. I'm heading to work, walking in the opposite direction of the street to get some shade, when all of a sudden this dog comes out of a person's house, looks at me and comes closer. I think it's gonna sniff my leg, but instead it sinks its teeth deep into my calf without warning. I'm limping and bleeding all over the ground, trying to desperately flag down passing cars, thinking this dog is just gonna attack me again. I somehow make it across the street, and it leaves and goes back to its house. But now I'm just on the sidewalk, limping and bleeding. I dropped my phone during the attack, and was trying to get someone to stop and help me. Guess where I ended up needing help? The exact spot the random dude stops me, and asks me if I'm okay not an hour before. By far one of the strangest and weirdest things to ever happen to me. I told my friend, and she swears I met a time traveler. When I was 7, I went to the mall with my mother and brother, who was 14. For some background, my brother wasn't the most alert and attentive human being, and my mother probably still trusted him a little bit too much. I recall my mum going into a women's clothing store, and when my tween brother saw bras and thongs, he probably decided to leave the store, with me following. My mum approved because he was old enough, I guess. I'm not entirely sure how me and my brother separated, but at one point I watched him going to a store. while I was left alone just wandering about. I distinctly remember seeing a Pikachu stuffed animal that drew my attention, and I began to ascend towards it. As I levitated towards the massive Pokemon, almost in a trance, some kid, about 16 and way taller than me, stood over me and yelled right at my face. His eyes were lit up and genuinely seemed crazy, at least to 7-year-old me. I started to look around for my mother or brother to magically appear, but for the first time in my life, I was in a situation where I was entirely alone. He kept asking me if he wanted me to see him rip open the Pikachu and watch his blood pour out. He then asked me where my mum was. That's when he realized I was all alone. This was the opportunity for a psycho teen to truly mess with a 7-year-old. He pushed the envelope explaining what sex was, describing 9/11 to me and a few other wildly inappropriate topics that made me choke up and almost beg out for help. Being a 7-year-old, I didn't have that kind of gut reaction and just stood by the Pikachu, and I remember holding the stuffed animal's hand just for any type of support. Then, as suddenly as this guy came in, he left. He walked away and out my line of vision, and I ran in the opposite direction towards where I came from, and ran into my brother. I didn't say a single thing, and being the inattentive kid he was, he didn't realize my misery. We then walked back to my mum, where I faked being okay. I felt safe being with them, and virtually forgot about what had just happened. We decided to get a milkshake and head towards the escalators. As we go up, dread overwhelms me. At the top, I see him again. He's standing there with 2 other kids. The other kids were laughing and looking at their friends, but he wasn't smiling. He just stared at me as I rode towards them with my family, who had no idea what was going on. As we inched towards this group, the dread increased simultaneously, as I realized all the friends had baseball bats. What the hell? Were they gonna hit me? Were they gonna attack my family? I walked behind my mother as we walked past them, and his friends sneered. After my mum and brother got a milkshake, for some reason I had lost my appetite. My mum said it was time to go home, as she needed to prepare dinner for my father. I frantically looked around to make sure those kids weren't following me. I ride the escalator down, hoping my safety, until I hear laughing again. I look around and saw his little group, but they weren't holding baseball bats, and the leader of the group wasn't present. I stood in horror riding the escalator, hoping that this would just end already. When we reached the bottom of the escalator, the friends turned right and kept walking. Then they turn around and one kid yells, "Hey kid," and points to the elevator right next to me. The kid was standing there, bat in hand, just staring at me 5 feet away. This is when I lose it and start crying uncontrollably. My mum going off on them, saying that they should be ashamed for even talking to me and to mind their own business. We head home, and I remember crying in my bed because I was terrified that this kid would just teleport into my room, in the same way that it seemed he was appearing everywhere I was in the morgue. Creepy mole rats, let's not meet again, because my mum might just beat the crap out of you. In 2014, I had travelled overseas with a close friend for 6 weeks from October through to December. My birthday is in the middle of November, and by some weird experience, my mother back home in Australia received a phone call from me. She said it rang for a bit, and picked it up. Automatically noticing my number, she assumed I called home for my birthday. I should also mention she runs her home phone on a landline. She picks it up, and received static and pure silence. She said she didn't hear anything else, and eventually the call dropped. I received a message on Facebook shortly after and read it an hour later on my laptop. She tells me she got a call from me. Why would I even dial an overseas number to a landline? It's going to cost me a fortune. No way. Weird to say the least. So I checked my iPhone call log, and my last phone call to home was 3 weeks ago from Melbourne. I hadn't made any other calls whatsoever. and I told her to leave the phone history logged on the phone. Several weeks pass and I arrive back home and check the logs. Fair enough, there's my number calling on my birthday. To me, I feel like another version of myself called me from another dimension or something, and I find this whole thing both creepy and bizarre. Me and my family were on holiday, and we were doing some clothes shopping in the mall. We had driven for a fair amount of time, so we all decided to stop at the bathrooms. As per usual, the girls' toilets have a queue, whereas the male toilets had no line. So me and my mom were waiting in line while my younger brother had gone in, finished, and gone outside to wait. My brother was outside on his own for around 5 minutes. He is 15, so this is no problem at all. When we come out, we all head off to go to another shop when we hear a man shouting at my brother aggressively. We all turn around, and this man was poking my brother in the chest, getting up in his face, and shouting things at him like, "You need to get that off your phone," and "You're a sicko." Visibly confused, my brother, with him being pretty much the sweetest guy you could ever meet, me and my mum knew that whatever this guy was accusing him of, he had something more. Eventually, we get to the guy and get him to calm down and explain what's going on. He starts spouting off that the game he is playing hurts me and he is causing damage and that he's a sicko. The guy couldn't tell us what exactly my brother was doing that affected him, which was red flag number 1. And it is where this encounter began to go from creepy to unnerving. How come he can't tell us what game is hurting him, or tell us anything about it? He starts pulling at his trouser leg and shows us his leg, pointing at them, saying, "This is what people like you have done to me. I try to show the doctors, but they send me to a psych every time." The thing is, there was nothing wrong with this dude's legs at all. They were normal looking with no signs of harm or injury. As this man was saying, me and my mum kind of looked at each other with a "are you serious" kind of look, and we both thought we were missing something major. He then starts to threaten us with, "I could have a hammer and I could attack you right now. In fact, I should because of what you did to me." The hammer thing goes on for a while, and he gestures hitting my brother across the face with a hammer for most of it. Eventually we managed to leave by apologizing and walking away quickly. It seemed like going along with this guy's accusations would make him stop harassing us. It made me really sad because obviously this man needed help that he wasn't getting, and it has left my brother slightly terrified about going places without us nearby. I've always been borderline obsessive about locking my doors. I did it as a kid, and as a teenager I learned through experience that a locked door is at least a deterrent and can give someone warning that a person wants to illegally enter their space. It's something I'm known for, even at social gatherings. I'll lock doors behind me when I come in without even thinking about it. I've heard the line, "Well, who the hell locked it?" followed by that flush of embarrassment because of course it was me, and now I have to say. For over a decade I've done nightly checks because I can't sleep without doing so. Knowing this is a preface for my story and highlights how strange the situation is. I only just moved here recently, 5 months ago in fact, from a way more heavily populated place in my state. The house where we reside is set far back from any pavement road, separated by 2 dirt roads and 2 private driveways, as my rental is on another person's property, so you go down their private drive and off to the side is my private drive, and I've never even seen a pedestrian back there. Nice and very private. No one can even come here without explicit instructions, and often I still have to meet them down the road, as GPS places my house a few fields to the south of where it really is. This is paradise for people like me, who value their privacy and don't like having visitors without prior notice. The house is semi-surrounded by trees and brush, with a field on the other two sides. It took a bit of getting used to, the rurality of it, hearing coyotes often, sometimes cows screaming in the night, and the darkness of having no nearby source of light pollution, as the nearest town is 20 miles away. Another relevant tidbit: I don't sleep in a completely dark house. I always leave lights on in a common area, usually only one, but a light nevertheless. The back door leads off into the trees, but it didn't feel so creepy, as a few yards in, there's a 6-foot-tall wire fence laden with vines and offering a further modicum of privacy. No one uses the back door. There's really no reason to. A month in and I found myself locked out, and unfortunately I often lock the door handle on my way out of reflex. As my conscious mind is where the part I know if I have keys out or not, but my subconscious takes over when I'm distracted. I knew I had only locked the handle on the back door and figured I could just pop it to get in myself. I checked the door out and it was pristine. None of those minute scratches that are present when you take a flat metal object and pop the lock on a cheap door. I didn't want to damage it, so I swallowed my embarrassment and called the landlord, admitting that I had locked myself out and needed back in. He came and let me in, and I worked on being more mindful. A little more than a week later, I wake up thirsty. I walk groggily to the kitchen, and as soon as I open my bedroom door, I realize it's way darker than it should be. My ever-burning light is out. I wonder briefly if there's a power outage, but I can hear my fan behind me in the room. So, it can't be that. I take another step, and the hair stands up on the back of my neck. That feeling that someone's watching. Another step, and it's beyond feeling. It's conviction. I turn my head to the left, where instincts say the person is standing, and for a split second I'm relieved. No one's there. In the next instant, though, that relief abandons me, and I notice I can see stars where only darkness should be. My back door is wide open. I take 2 very fast steps backwards out of view of anything that could be in my backyard, knowing I'm responsible for more people's safety than just my own. I don't retreat for long, almost immediately stepping back further and forwards. I have to shut the door, of course. The entire path there, I just know someone's out there, in the dark, waiting until I'm close enough to snatch. I reach out into the pitch darkness for the knob, expecting to feel a hand close over mine at any second. After a moment of panic and driven fumbling, my hand makes contact with the knob and I slam it shut. I go to turn the lock and find it still engaged. Maybe, just maybe this once, the door wasn't completely shut. Like maybe the latch hadn't fully engaged. The turned off light remained a mystery. Both of my boys said it wasn't them, and that's very believable because they've never done it before. Both of them like having the light on to find the bathroom and such, so I write it off as strange, but nothing else was amiss. It was just one of those things that never had a full explanation. From that point on, I put my weight onto the door any time I check or lock it, on my rare and occasional trips to the backyard. Life goes on, and I almost put it to the back of my mind. Almost. Until 3 weeks later. I wake from a nightmare. For the last 10 years, I haven't had a dream I can remember, but I do occasionally have nightmare clusters. Mouth dry, bladder throbbing. It was one of those bad ones where you wake up after making inarticulate sounds trying to scream from a sleep-paralyzed mouth. Deja vu. After my bathroom trip, I emerge into a dark kitchen. 2 steps in, there's someone watching. The door is wide open, a panicked quick retreat followed by a fear-fueled moment of bravery where I rush forward and close the door. Sure at every moment that I'm about to be torn out into the night and slaughtered. Strange. I know for sure the door didn't pop on in its own time. What's going on? My adrenaline finally crashes as I lay in bed after trying to figure this out. I've left my bedroom door open this time so I can hear any goings-on in the house. and I finally fall back asleep with 2 hours to spare before I have to get up. When I do, I wake my boys and I'm halfway to the coffee maker before I see it. The facing door is open again. This time no real feeling of being observed. Lights still on in the kitchen. I do what I already should have done and check the door for a sign of tampering. There's new scratches and bend marks where the aluminium gave way to being pried. At least this means it's not a ghost. I don't really know what to do. Life goes on. 2 weeks after that, the chickens penned 30 feet or so from my bedroom window, crow long into the night. Even the hens are part of the show this time, with the hens making eerie little screams. It makes my sleep fitful, not very restful, and I wake up at 2 a.m. when my fan goes off. The power's out. Damn. I get up to use the latrine and to light a few kitchen candles to save on anyone needing to get up in the middle of the night while traversing the house in the dark. 2 steps in. Cue the hair on the back of my neck, and this time I can hear the crickets before I even turn my head. The door is of course open. After I survive another door shutting, I spend a lot of the time thinking about this. There was more damage, scratches and gauges in the jam this morning. I try to rationalize how this can possibly be happening and can't think of anything that could possibly account for it. Any innocent reason I can attribute to it goes out the window when I remember this has never happened even once in the daytime. I think maybe I missed the scratches, that they were already there and that my paranoid brain told me they were worse, which could be feasible, all except for the day I got locked out and remember it was in such good condition that I didn't even have the heart to pop the door myself. I decide to change the deadbolts around. The front door has a square cord lock, and the back has a sloping one that I'm honestly sure is actually backwards in the door. Work picks up, life moves on. That night I'm exhausted. I can't find my Phillips head, so in the place of the locks I put an errant Christmas decoration adorned with bells to place on the door handle and go to sleep. It's never happened 2 nights in a row anyway. I even considered setting up a camera, but thought of the little fact in my music. Plus, I'm honestly scared to see what I would catch. For once, I'm early in bed. And as soon as my head hits the pillow, I'm asleep. Cue the nightmares. I wake up for the first time at midnight on the dot. Dark kitchen, back door open, scary as hell, and fall back asleep. Wake up at 1:30, door open. Wake up at 3, and to my enormous relief the door is closed and I fall back asleep, right into a nightmare. In this one I can hear Christmas bells. I come upon a little girl with her back turned to me, and in that weird nightmare logic, at first I'm not afraid of her and ask her what her name is. And she responds that someone's coming. She starts to get louder, and after a few more crescending repetitions, all the while Christmas bells going on in the background, she turns to me, jaw on her chest, mouth unnaturally wide, and screams that someone's here. I wake. It's 5, and a false dawn shines faintly through my window. I immediately get up. Of course the kitchen is dark and the door is open, but surprisingly, no feeling of being watched. I feel like the danger has passed, like gunsmoke in the air after the main event. I close the door, and to my absolute horror, find the Christmas bells laid neatly on the dryer, no longer attached to the door. I spoke to my boys that morning and asked them if they'd heard anything that night. My 13-year-old says nothing, except that he got up at 2:30 to pee and the back door was open, so he closed it. I asked him about the bells and he says he's pretty sure they were on the handle. I switched the locks. A few days ago there was more damage to the door, but so far, it's holding. This culminated in me getting cameras. I set them up, and there were more scratches on the door, like someone tried to pry the lock. But the camera picked up nothing. It doesn't have audio. 2 weeks after that, I left my bag in the car with my allergy meds and nasal spray, and woke up in the night because I couldn't breathe through my nose and I was getting a cold. I went out to get my medication, went into the carport and heard something. It sounded like a heavy bipedal animal in the brush. I was scared. It was strange. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" I say, but there was just silence. I yelled again to no reply. For a solid minute I looked, trying to will my eyes to see whatever's the cause of the noise. Could see nothing, and turned to walk up the stairs when I'm confident I heard whatever or whoever it was bolt in the other direction. I'm quite positive it was a person. When I wake up, I check my driveway for dirt and there were footprints. But there were others among them from the crew who happened to work there the day before. This is getting very strange. Once I got to where the driveway met the dirt road, there was no way to trace where they had gone. And of course by then the prints had been obliterated by the tire tracks of early risers. As far as evidence goes, there wasn't much. I mean, it could have been there from the day before. After a month of peace, I was feeling pretty good. I didn't know why I had stopped all of a sudden, even if whoever was at the trees that night was the perpetrator. I doubt I scared them off. I was talking with my landlord one afternoon, as he lives nearby, and I see him often walk over. He's been pretty busy lately, not only with other social groups, but he's also been doing a lot of traveling. Our conversation meandered to the topic of the neighbors to my left. He was a strange one, but up until this point he seemed quite harmless. He spent most of his time in his house, and I thought at this point perhaps he had slight agoraphobia, as he rarely went anywhere and seemed to have most of his things delivered. I didn't know the guy well, but he wasn't super friendly. I would sometimes see him out in his robe and boxers on his porch or in his yard, and I would wave and he would never wave back, with the exception of once. My landlord told me in this conversation that he was quite sure this guy had a very outdated opinion on women. I had mentioned he never waved, and that's what he responded with. The reason he guessed he didn't. Here's the interesting point though. He said something to the effect of, "I don't think you'll have to worry about that anymore," as in his antisocial attitude. So of course I asked him why. He was of the opinion that his house was about to be foreclosed, and that he had made a run for it. Basically that he went to live with family or hooked a rental before the police showed up to formally evict. He wasn't sure though, it was just a hypothesis. I thought maybe he was on disability or something prior to this, as he never seemed to go to work, but he clearly had some way to pay his bills, or so I thought. I began to pay more attention, and I think my landlord's right. The sheriff's office showed up with papers one day, but as far as I've seen, no one came to the door. His yard isn't overgrown, but it's mostly shade covered with leaves. Besides, no one has to really cut their grass due to the weather. His house just feels empty. There's also a tent that's been set up in his backyard for 2 months. Some people don't take very good care of their things, but up until a few months ago, I wouldn't have thought that this was his character, as he did take care of his yard pretty well and kept all his tools properly housed. A good indicator would have been a vehicle, of course, but I've never seen one there to begin with. My leading hypothesis in my mind is that it's him. I can't speak for motive though. Maybe he was working himself up to do something worse. Perhaps he had some type of mental issue and the whole thing was some part of his plan I'll never understand. What I do know is that ever since that time, where I guess he took off, I have had zero issues. I haven't come home to an empty house with the feeling that someone's just left. I haven't had very small things be misplaced. When I've sworn up and down, it was no longer where I put it. No waking up in the night, swearing someone was staring at me only to look at my bedroom door and see a pitch black house with a back door open. I didn't have any idea if he was gone, but there was a noticeable change in the atmosphere. It was subtle, but it was better. All I know is that I went from desperately wanting to move to getting pretty comfortable in my home again. I do like to think the most of people, but anyway, I'm pretty sure it's him. The only one thing that I will say is that I mentioned before there's a camera that sees part of my property that doesn't belong to me. And coincidentally, the problems were occurring in the side of the yard the camera couldn't see. While a simple recon would show the camera for what it was quickly, as there was a red light on it, very visible at night to an outsider they'd immediately see the camera, and anyone breaking the law would be wary. A neighbor would know even better which the weak spots were, which is anything beyond the house's front. This happened about 2 years ago, and still makes me a little afraid to walk around the mall by myself. I had just turned 14 at the time, and my cousin was with me who was 13. I look a lot older than I am, but my cousin looks her age. We're both really sure, but my body and face is way more developed than hers. My mum dropped my cousin and I off at the mall during my little sister's soccer game, and she would pick us up after. We had about 2 hours to kill, and this mall was pretty big, so there wasn't going to be an issue. Cut to about an hour in, and a man, probably of about 20 years old, comes up to us. "Can I get your Snapchat?" he asks. My cousin and I give each other a glance, and I politely say, "No." "Come on, seriously?" I shake my head and tell him again, "No," and my cousin and I start to walk away from him. "Don't walk away from me, you're a beautiful girl and I just want to get to know you." My cousin and I start walking a little faster, but this does not stop him. "I have a boyfriend," I say sternly, even though I didn't. He walks in front of us, trying to get us to stop. "Then at least let me be your friend." He smiles, looking me up and down. "No," I say louder, alerting the people around us that something was going on. My cousin and I walked away, trying to lose this guy, but he persisted. He followed us, and we even went into a store to try and get rid of him. While we go through this store, he's still begging me to give him my Snapchat. I keep ignoring him and found a security guard not too far ahead in the store we were in. I started to approach him and the guy took a hint and finally ran off. I reported him to the security guard and explained what happened. Not sure if anything came of it, but still, the creep who tries to hit on a minor, let's not meet. Me and my mum were once taking a walk through the deep woods behind our house. It's a very large area, a huge park. Anyway, we were taking this long walk like we usually do on Saturday afternoons. The cold air was hitting our face, and it was refreshing to be out of the house. We started our walk at around 2, which is the time we usually head out. My mum puts on a nice pot of soup that my sisters were going to look after, so that we could eat it when we'd be getting back around 3:30, lovely and warm. By the time we reach the peak, it's starting to look dark, but this is still summer, so we're a bit confused as to what's going on. We assume it must be some kind of strange meteorological effect, and try to dismiss it completely, telling ourselves that it must be nothing, so we start making our way back. But the darkness grows ever heavier, but by the time we reach home it's now completely pitch black. We knew the time we left, and only when we checked our phones did we realize that we had been gone for closer to 6 hours than just 1. However, for us it felt like barely an hour, as we were walking and chatting the whole time. I want to point out that my mum has a TV show that she likes to watch at 7, so there's no way in the world we would have gone out anywhere near that time, as her risking watching her show is dangerous territory. We were so confused. My mum said that we should call the police, but we had no reason to really call them. What would we accuse what of? Nature stealing our time? We were both left flabbergasted, exhausted and confused as to what the hell had just happened to us. In some strange way, we felt kind of violated. What had taken our time? And how? My sister suggested it was the fairies. In any case, glitch, fairies, paranormal, whatever you want to call it, we were left very spooked and haven't gone for a walk since. This story happened when my best friend and I were 15. We had to take an important exam at the end of the year, and consequently attended some private sessions in order to prepare. Because of this, we would only hang out on Saturdays after 5. We were at the mall, and after a bit of window shopping, she asked me to come outside into the park so she could smoke a cigarette. She took it from her mother, but I didn't smoke. I have never liked it. I accepted it, as I was used to her requirement. So we were in the mall's park, walking while she smoked the cigarette. It was roughly 6, but was already dark outside. Let me describe where we were at. This was a large park full of trees and big rectangular-shaped bushes. On the side aisle there was some restaurants, a full 10-meter gap, an exit to the dark street and to the parking lot, another big space and a place for skating. We thought we were 100% safe, as we were still walking on the mall's property. We arrived near that strange exit when a 5'9" man approaches us and asks for a cigarette. My friends tell him that she doesn't have any other cigarettes because she got it from someone else too. He seemed to be in his late 40s, was unshaven and wearing a red hoodie, which almost covered his eyes. I tell him that we have to go, to which he responds with some incoherent words. We both knew something was off, so we made some steps back. "Why? You scared? I won't do anything to you," he said as he was approaching. "Don't worry, I've met a lot of girls like you," he said, and then started to mumble something else. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know if he had a weapon, and behind us was a big bush, and in front of us was him. If we chose to run in different directions, he would be able to catch at least one of us, and probably take her with him. There weren't many people, but the ones who were passing by didn't seem to care about our terrified looks. My friend starts to repeat that she was sorry, but she couldn't help him, and I think that one of the passers-by heard her. Fortunately, a man of about 6'3", who looked a lot younger and stronger than the creep, stopped and asked him why he was bothering us, but he wasn't giving any response. My friend took her chance, crushed her cigarette with her foot as quickly as possible and began running. I, as a complete idiot, remained frozen for a few more seconds and looked into our saviour's eyes, and only then did I start sprinting. We didn't stop running until we were sure that they couldn't see us anymore. Both of them left, and we got back into the mall safely and never told anyone about this creepy encounter. I was a high school student living with my mother in a third-floor apartment. I used to sleep in the living room because the apartment only had one bedroom, and it was my mum's. I was happy with that little space. I was a happy kid. I always got up at 6 a.m. to go to school, and my mum always got up at 5 a.m. to have a shower and make breakfast before dropping me off at school and heading to work. That morning I woke up and all the lights were on, every single one of them, even the one in my room. I went to grab my phone, and strangely enough it wasn't there. I headed to the bathroom and saw all the drawers and doors and the furniture was all open. I was deeply confused. Anyway, my mum came out the bathroom and asked me what the hell I'd been doing. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about, and that I thought she did it since she was always up earlier than me, and asked her if she'd seen my cell phone. Then I saw it. Deep inside her green eyes, the realization. I could see the fear. All the pieces inside her head clicking in place. She leapt to the kitchen and found the window wide open. A kitchen knife on the ground, and some dusty fingerprints on the wall where someone put weight to climb inside. It was then when my sleepy head put together the pieces. Someone somehow climbed all the way up our balcony, got inside our apartment and robbed us. All the while I was asleep in my bed right there in the living room. She hugged me and asked if I was okay. I said I never heard anything. Didn't even wake up when this unknown person turned the lights on and rummaged through our stuff. It was super weird. I have the lightest sleep since I have memory, and still do many years later. I don't dare to open my mum's bedroom door, so she didn't notice anything. My grandma says that some angel protected me in my sleep and that's why I didn't wake up, but I don't believe in that kind of stuff. I don't think they knew I was there either. The police never found the robber, and we put steel bars on the windows and moved anyway sometime after that. This happened when I was in high school. At least 6 years have passed, and my mother and I moved from the apartment. I'm now grown and living with my boyfriend, but until today I'm still paranoid and keep thinking why I didn't wake up, though I am grateful that I did not. I was getting the bus home from work and decided to get off at a shopping centre/mall instead of the stop at my house because I needed a few things. While on the bus, a man was sitting behind me. Now I know this sounds strange, but from the moment I got on the bus, I felt strange about him and could feel and could also see in the reflection of the bus window that he was literally staring at me for the entire 50-minute bus journey, not looking away once. And I felt unsettled about him, but told myself not to be silly and shook it off. When I got off the bus, he started walking the same way I was. This is a busy town, so there were a lot of people walking that way, so I didn't think anything of it. I then walked past around the shopping centre and could see him right behind me in the reflection of the windows. I tried to shake this feeling that he was following me, and I took a sharp left into the next shop. Guess what? So did he. I then walked over to the woman's clothes and he followed me. I walked straight to the woman's shoes and he followed me. I walked back on myself and went back to the clothes, and he was watching me the whole time, even making it obvious at this point that he was now following me, staring at me and smiling as if this were a game. At this point I said to him, as I felt comfortable as we were in a busy shop, "Are you okay? Is there something you want?" He didn't say anything and just smiled at me really creepily. At this point I was fed up, so I walked out the shop and he followed me. I rang my friend and loudly, so that she could hear, said, "Hey Mary, there's a friend following me all around the shop centre. Can you come and meet me?" And at that he ran off. Literally ran, and I didn't see him again. I was really shaken. The scary thing is that my house is in the middle of nowhere, with no houses or cars nearby. And I kept thinking of what would have happened if he got off at the same stop as me and followed me down that country road. I would like to start this story by introducing myself and my friends, to give you a brief description of my area, and so that you have a better picture for the story. My name is Dusty. I'm 21 years old, with brown hair and eyes. I'm fairly tall at 6'2", skinny, and I'm just your normal young guy. The girl I was talking to at the time was called Caitlin. She's 18, kind of short, probably 5'6", and skinny like me. Blonde, petite, and also a very outgoing person too. Courtney is Caitlin's stepsister. She was a year younger than me, probably 5'6", tall and a medium build. We live in a small county called Smith County, made up of a few small rural towns, located in southwest Virginia. It's your typical picture of Virginia. We're surrounded by mountains, farms, and plenty of trees. That's enough describing, so I'll dive straight into the story. My story started out with just any other day. Caitlin and I liked each other a lot, so we spent almost every day of the week together. I would drive from my town to hers, which is about 20 minutes away, to pick her up, and then we would just go ride around or go to Walmart to kill time, because we lived somewhere where there was literally nothing to do. I picked her up, and we talked about going to do something, so we went to Hungry Mother Park. It was a place nearby we would go to about once a week and just walk around the trails and beaches. This place is a massive state park with a large lake, so it's a great place to do all kinds of recreational activities. We arrived at around 8 p.m. This was during the summer, so it stayed daylight until around 9, and still had warm weather outside. The park is closed when we normally come because of our work schedules, but the gates remain open so that you can still have access at night. We arrive and exit the car. The parking lot I go to is beside the beach area, so that's the first place I go walking. Once we are bored, we start on the trail in front of the parking lot. The trail is paved for a few miles and surrounded by trees the majority of the time. Continuing down the trail after around 2 minutes, it comes to a three-way fork. At this fork is a large white gazebo, and to the left of the path leads to a tourist information building that goes right to a picnic shelter and straight goes farther out. Going straight, we reach the boat docks not too far from the fork. We head down the small hill on the set of concrete steps to the dock, which is cluttered with paddle boats. We walk onto it and sit at the end just talking about random things as we usually do. It's gotten dark now, roughly 9:30, and the only source of light available to us is from our phones, and the lone light located at the small shed at the docks. After talking for what felt like 20 minutes, we saw a flashlight up the hill on the trail coming from the way we came. The light is moving at an odd angle and fast pace, so I assumed it must be someone on a bike. This wasn't alarming, but it was very rare to see anyone else out here this late. They get closer, and we see that it's a woman walking at a fast pace. She's looking at her phone, talking to what seems like herself, and seems very upset. We sat in silence and heard her crying, but couldn't make out what it was she was saying. The woman continues past us on the trail, and she cannot see us down the hill with our lights off. The trail continues out a good way through a lightly wooded area, and comes to another fork which can take you on out to the mountains, or, to the right, a big wooden bridge that leads over to an island. From our position we can see her light almost the entire time in the woods. As we watch, she takes the right across the bridge. Still able to hear her talking, but not being able to make out what she's saying, Caitlin and I sat completely silent, whispering about it. About 5 minutes later, we see the lady come back across the bridge and back to the trail, through the wood and heading in our direction again. Right around this time we both get texts and a call from Caitlin's stepsister Courtney. Courtney was our friend but got annoying sometimes. She's the kind of person who will invite themselves to everything. Being there to get away from her, we assumed she was just trying to intrude or make plans with us because she was jealous of us not going to her house and hanging out with her. We ignore the messages and silence our phones and look back at the trail. I notice the woman is now close again, and then my heart drops as I see her taking the trail coming down the hill towards us. I stand up with Caitlin. She hasn't seen us yet, I think, but she is approaching and seems more upset than earlier. I ask Caitlin to stand behind me and prepare myself for what's coming. I tell her to just run back to the car if anything happens. The woman is now right on us, her light in my face, and begins yelling. My heart is pounding out of my chest. I quickly shine my light into her face to reveal that it's Courtney. Caitlin goes up to her arguing why the hell she was here and that she should have stayed home. We were trying to be alone. Somehow she must have tracked us down on Snapchat. So they argue for a bit, and Courtney is acting insane, crying and saying she's sad because she was stung by a bee on the bridge. And then as she storms off, her phone dies, but she continues into the dark, alone, backwards towards the way we came from, while Caitlin and I keep following at a distance. We were whispering to each other, and she tells me she's never acted this bad before. Then we debate about how bizarre it was that Courtney was crying and talking to someone, or maybe herself. Now approaching the three-way fork again, we've been looking down the entire time, and I was on my phone checking Snapchat. Looking up, Courtney is not in front of us anymore, and without her having a light, we assumed she must be out of sight as she was further ahead of us. Then all of a sudden I catch something from the corner of my eye and look to the trail towards the information booth. The building is 200 yards away and there's only one street lamp right near the building. In the light of the lamp I see someone that looks like Courtney. They didn't have a flash on and the outline looks like it was her. So that's what we thought. She is walking in the opposite direction of the way we are facing, as if she is heading towards the building. Caitlin has poor eyesight, so she could barely see her, but I have perfect vision and could see as Courtney was up the light. Very confused by this, we start whispering to ourselves as to why she's going that way. She parked beside us, and taking that way is much longer having to go around to get to the parking lot, and the bathrooms are closed at the information booth at the time. Still standing at the fork, Caitlin states she could have sworn Courtney kept going straight and didn't see her go that way. We both have this heavy feeling in our gut, and the atmosphere feels all wrong. I almost yell out for her and start to follow the trail to see where she's going, but then I decide to not do anything, and for us to continue straight, and that she will just meet us at the car whenever she comes. The fork is only minutes away from where we parked, taking the trail that we were on. I joked to Caitlin, "What would you do if we go up here and she's in her car?" We laughed and kept talking, even though we still had that eerie feeling. 30 seconds later of walking, both of us froze, as the cars were now in sight, and we can clearly see Courtney is already sitting in her car with the interior light on. We look at each other, then begin to sprint. As we are sprinting for the car, I'm looking over my shoulder, shining my light, keeping a lookout, and trying to keep up in the very dark woods. We finally reach the vehicle and begin explaining what we saw. We asked her about it, and she said she kept going straight and never taking a right. Caitlin and I knew this was true because she couldn't have beat us here any other way. I have chills, and the question of who or what is out there is now flooding in all of us. I start reasoning logically that it's probably just a normal person walking and we didn't see them drive in. I'm not a believer in the supernatural whatsoever, but I do enjoy learning about it. Anytime something strange occurs, I try not to put much thinking into it. And after a few minutes of giving back our input and looking around on high alert, we decide it's best to leave. Courtney leaves in her car and Caitlin and I sit in my car for a few minutes, rambling on about tonight's events. Then I get the idea to ride further down the road to see if we see anyone. Driving now, we never passed any vehicles or people, and there's only one exit, so we would have seen someone leaving. Driving past the information building to the side of it, I can see straight down the trail where we saw a person, but there's nothing. I pull into the parking lot at the building, circling around, with no cars or people in sight. The place is well lit enough, with street lamps here and there for me to have clear visibility. We continue further into the park, down the main road, checking every single parking lot. There was not a single vehicle or person, and the feeling of dread grew seeing that very empty road. Leaving now, we talk about everything for hours, going over possible theories on what it could have been and how weird her stepsister was acting before. Like I said, I do not believe in the supernatural, but this opened me up a little bit more to the idea. My final conclusion is this was just a person walking, maybe camping somewhere away in the woods, and they made it in the forest before we drove by. Them not having a light on and similar clothes must have been coincidences, or perhaps it was a glitch, and we were seeing Courtney's actions in another universe. One time I was at the Mort to play Magic the Gathering. I was 15 years old at the time and had just finished up around 9:30. I called my mom and she was on her way to come pick me up. I lived 30 minutes away, so I had some time to kill. I live in a relatively small town, so everything closed at 9. I was waiting outside of Starbucks, and there was an old lady with a dog sitting at a table smoking. I walk up to her and asked her if I could pet her dog. People in Hawaii tend to be nice, and I'm a relatively social person. She said yes and that she loves people, so I reach in to pet the dog. The dog starts barking at me, which is unusual because animals usually love me. She then proceeds to tightly grasp my hand and put it in front of the dog's face and says that I'm nice, etc. to the dog. She then tells me it's good to pet the dog, and I slowly reach to pet the dog, and at that moment it bites my hand. She yells at the dog and asks me if I would like to hit her cigarette. She asks me my name, and I tell her, "Oh, that's my son's name," she says, and then points to the 20-something off buck Hawaiian dude sitting on the table over. He was silent the entire time until that moment. He still said nothing and just kind of stared me down. At this point I was thinking of an exit strategy. She then asked me if she knew where she could score some weed. Then she tells me I could be a model and she knows a casting agent. By that point another man walks up to her and they all start whispering to each other. I got a text from my mum, and as my headphones were in, my phone read them out to me, that she was on the other side of the mall. While they were distracted speaking to each other, I book it to the other side. I was speed walking when I noticed two men following me. I then run as fast as I could into my mum's car, get in, and see the two men walking towards me. My mum was on the phone and starts driving away. 10 minutes later, when she's off the phone, I tell her what happened and she called the cops. They asked us the address and said that they will send over people and get my statement, but they never did. So, creepy lady and her dog? Let's not point again. I was sitting at the mall eating lunch one day, waiting for my boyfriend at the time to show up. I was alone, which is normal, and wasn't fazed. What wasn't normal was when I looked up and saw a group of 5 or 6 guys approaching me and sit down with me at my table, and the table next to me, at all angles without asking. They were constantly looking around, acting really sketchy, and were badgering me to talk to them, and I felt really awkward. They kept trying to talk to me, and were giving me creepy compliments, asking for my number, the usual. So of course, despite having my phone directly in my hands, I was like, "Sorry, I don't have a phone," hoping they would get the hint. When they told me they were in their early 20s and late teens, they asked me how old I was, and I replied with 16. Luckily, shortly after, cops and more cops showed up and immediately made it clear that I was uncomfortable and not involved with them. Apparently they were stealing and causing trouble all over the mall. Thankfully they were removed from the mall and my boyfriend ended up showing up shortly after. Everything turned out okay, and I don't think they were going to actually try to hurt me with a bunch of people around, but you never know. It was definitely freaky for sure.